Hi, listeners. This is From Ideology to Unity, and I'm here with Madan Mohan from the podcast London Revelation. Hi, Madan. How are you doing?
Hi, Nick. Yeah, very good today. How's yourself?
Yeah, it's a nice morning. Yeah.
It's been raining over here in Wales, really hammering down, but we tend to get a lot of rain. We're right out by the Welsh coast.
So just regular Welsh weather, then.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how did you end up? Why did you set up your podcast?
Well, what happened is I got banned from Facebook. I've been I've got a YouTube channel and I've been busy on Facebook. I've got about 72 different pages. Every time I have an idea, I make a Facebook page out of it. And if I've got something to say, what I tend to do is to post around all the groups I've joined, which is about 70 or 80, just basically what I've been doing is building up an audience on Facebook. So, it's built up over the years, but there's a tendency to feel that, you're not really communicating your ideas. So anyway, I shared something that contradicted the mainstream narrative on the COVID thing, and Facebook promptly shut me down.
Oh,
They banned me completely.
wow. So what was that?
I was sharing the video of Dr. Andrew Kaufman at Trafalgar Square. There was a protest about 2, 3 weeks ago.
Oh,
David
okay.
Icke was speaking there. There was, different figures vary, but they were claiming 30 to 40,000 people went to Trafalgar Square. None of them wearing masks, all crowded in, and David Icke and Dr. Andrew Kaufman basically standing up saying how much nonsense is being spoken at the moment about it's anyway. They said their thing. I shared the video and I promptly got banned. So I thought it was a permanent ban. They actually reinstated me after 3 days, but I didn't know that was going to happen. So this was September the 23rd. I got banned. So
Wow.
I was looking around, and I'd already looked at Brian Rose interviewing David Icke.
Yeah, that was interesting to me.
That's what brought London Real to my attention. So I subscribed after I listened to that interview, and of course, because Brian Rose is extremely proactive in building his digital media
Oh, yeah.
podcast platform, his little tabs kept popping up on my desktop, and I thought, oh well, broadcast yourself. He's constantly advertising his courses, so I thought, okay, I'll perhaps that will be my outlet. So yeah, so I subscribed to the course on that day, and I've been struggling with the course because Facebook, although they let me back in after 3 days, they wouldn't let me join any groups or post to any groups. So I wasn't
Oh,
actually allowed to join my own team on Broadcast Yourself for 2 weeks after I started the course.
oh
But so
dear.
I'm slowly catching up anyway. But anyway, it's fine. But yeah, that's the story of how I came to be doing this podcast course. And now I'm really happy the way things have turned out. I kind of see a divine hand in this because I'm
Yeah,
seeing now that through podcasting, we can reach a much bigger audience. I mean, this is a revolution in broadcasting. So yeah,
absolutely.
that's the backstory. Yeah, go on.
Well, I mean, my story was, how I discovered it, I also saw a lot of the adverts coming up, and it felt like, well, something was telling me this is the way to go. And because it's really interesting synchronicity, because I discovered it, broadcast yourself, 5 minutes before he did this live stream where he was talking all about the course and what it involves.
Right.
And that day we could sign up for cheaper, which I did because I was really interested in it. But I discovered that 5 minutes before it started, and it was just like, it could be a coincidence, but I'm inclined to see it as synchronicity and some sort of divine thing, I suppose. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
So I guess people were drawn in, and that's why there's so many people in this course that are deeply spiritual, I suppose. Maybe there's something drawing us in. Or it could be his magnetic personality.
Well, it was only just this week our. Were you there at the Tuesday meeting when he has all 90 of us there?
Yeah.
And it was the first time I realised, the first time it really clicked that Brian Rose is actually running for Mayor of London, and it's a serious campaign. I'd seen some mention of it. I thought it was a bit of a joke, Brian for Mayor, but he's actually running a serious campaign to be Mayor of London. I mean, this is, he's a very dynamic guy. I mean, I presume he must like being busy because he's pretty busy with his broadcast, with his London Reel, but.
Yeah.
He's going to be, following in the footsteps of Ken Livingstone, who I liked, and Boris Johnson. I'm not his biggest fan, but he's certainly got charisma.
So, what would you say your spiritual beliefs are?
I was raised Baptist. My sister was a Sunday school teacher, so I was, very much saturated in Bible stories and Jesus, and I learned to kind of love and respect Jesus as a child. I got the impression that he was quite different from God, that as the son, he was more kind of kind and generous, a bit like an early peace-loving hippie, if you like. And I got the feeling that God the Father was a bit more strict and scary. So I kind of separated the two.
Yeah, God, the Old
And then
Testament. Sorry.
then I drifted away from that. As a teenager, you just kind of feel, I don't know, going to church and Boys Brigade, that was all tied in with the church. Oh, that's my phone ringing. The Boys Brigade, that was all tied in with the church. And you couldn't attend Boys Brigade if you didn't go to church. And I got fed up with both of them by the age of 14, so I just let it go. And I was drifting as a teenager, and it wasn't the happiest time of my life, I'll tell you that, being in secondary school.
It's not for a lot of us, really.
No, and it's not just, it's an all boys school, which is fine. But I think it's one of those environments where you either sink or swim. And I spent 7 years sinking.
I probably wouldn't have done well.
I started 6 weeks late. I had a bone marrow disease, so I couldn't join in the sports. I had loads of pills rattling around in me. I started school with a plaster cast from my armpits down to my waist. I couldn't get on the bus. And the upshot of that was that all delayed the onset of adolescence, which is probably your worst nightmare as a teenager, to be the youngest, weediest kid in your year. So everyone else, this is making yourself vulnerable, isn't it? Anyway,
it is.
this is my story. This is what took me to a different space from many people I grew up with. So, by the time most boys, their voice is breaking around 14. I was 17 before my voice broke. I was in the sixth form. Yeah, I was in the sixth form. So, 1976, I was 17. That was the summer I grew tall. And my liberation from all this misery was motorbikes. As soon as I was 17, I got a motorbike. And all of a sudden, I had some kudos. I had a BSA 650, this big loud beast of a motorcycle. And all of a sudden I was tall, and all of a sudden I had girlfriends. So it all happened at age 17. But
that must have been one hell of a year for you.
Well, it felt like some compensation for the previous miserable 7 years in senior school, because boys, just kids, they're not kind to each other.
If you're not a popular kid, if you're not,
if you're not one of the sports people or one of the cool people or an academic, and I wasn't really any of those things. I mean, I was reasonably bright. I was good at languages, but I sank at school. But anyway, by the time I was age 18, I only stayed on in the sixth form because I was too embarrassed that my voice hadn't broken at the age of 16 to go out and look for a job. So I stayed on for another couple of years and suffered a bit longer, but at least I had the kudos of turning up at school on a big motorbike. But yeah, age 18, I left and started work, and then a year later, my mother died, and yeah, that's where my spiritual journey began, really. And as I said, by the time I was searching here and there, I was looking into psychic things. I went to churches, seances. I was looking at all sorts of wacky stuff,
So,
and uh, you know, inevitably, I stumbled across the Hare Krishnas. Actually, I was working as a motorcycle courier in central London back in the 80s, and I
oh,
was making like £500 a week, and my rent in a bed sit in Greenwich was £37 a week. So you can imagine I was a single man, and just having fun then. Really, I had a good motorbike, and a nice circle of friends.
but I suppose your current, what you grew up with, your religion that you grew up with, didn't give you a foundation to really deal with your mother passing away at that age.
No, the classic Christian thing, so-called Christian philosophy, and I now don't accept that it's actually real Christian philosophy, but the idea is that you only have one life, and at the end of that life, you either succeed in going to heaven, or God punishes you in hell for eternity. And I just don't believe either of those things. It just sounded nonsensical to me. So when I heard that
Yeah.
there's such a thing as reincarnation, that actually we are spirit souls, we're not just physical bodies, and we progress from one body to another, and that human life is the opportunity to make your connection with God. And this great philosophy was explained to me by the Hare Krishnas, and I also came to understand that the Hare Krishnas weren't just bringing some sort of Hindu philosophy to the Western world in the 1960s, but actually they were restoring uh, the world's native culture. The Celtic culture of Britain and Europe was actually identical in its structure, language, rituals to the ancient Vedic culture of India. And
Completely identical or just similar?
no, completely identical.
The language, the written language wasn't.
Well, the Welsh language is based on Sanskrit. That's acknowledged by teachers of the Welsh language. They're two perfectly phonetic languages. You know that
Oh,
English isn't a phonetic language. It's a hybrid language, and half of the words don't sound like what they look like. In
yeah.
Welsh, as in Sanskrit, you have complete consistency with language. So the words all sound like what they look like.
So I wonder how that even happened. Do you have any idea that how? I mean, this gets
Absolutely.
into wacky territory, but
No, this isn't wacky territory
not
at
not
all.
really. But it by standards, it's very different.
No, this is a different view of history. What we're raised with at school is essentially the Roman, Saxon, Norman, conquerors version of history. That
Yeah.
these people who've invaded Britain. I mean, basically, there were 6 Celtic strongholds that the Romans aimed to utterly destroy, and what they failed in destroying was Wales, Ireland, Scotland, Cornwall, the Isle of Man, and Brittany. These were the last 6 strongholds of Celtic culture, which was actually Vedic culture.
Oh,
Originally, let me just say, originally Vedic culture, this was a worldwide culture, and there's ample evidence of it worldwide. So there would be a world emperor seated in Hastinapur, which is now New Delhi, northern India, and he would be like the king of kings. There
so
would
when
still
do you
be
think this happened?
we entered the Kali Yuga 3102 BC, about 5,000 years ago. So Vedic culture prevailed up until that time. The last vestige of Vedic culture that we've seen in Europe then was what we call the Celtic culture. And the last king who has been ridiculed and minimized and mythologized in Britain, the last king who reflected the Vedic culture, which is where the king has a mood of service to the people rather than ruling
Yeah.
over the people. The last legendary king was none other than King Arthur, the second King Arthur, who has now been historically proven by Alan Wilson, the great forensic historian, and his legendary druid sannyasi advisor was Merlin. So, and I live just 20 miles up the road from Carmarthen. The name Carmarthen comes from Caer Mrithyn. It literally means the seat of Merlin. It was the site
Wow.
of, oh yeah, and there's a massive statue of Merlin there, and the shopping centre is Merlin's Walk, and what is now Wilco, and it was Tesco's, was this massive, great high mound, and it's the site of an old Franciscan monastery. It was a massively influential monastery. I don't know exactly when that was built, but yeah, Merlin and Arthur, that was around sort of 6th century.
So are you saying that they built a monastery on the old site where Merlin had a mound, burial mound or something?
Well, the town of Carmarthen is the oldest town in Wales, and it was named after Merlin, literally the seat of Merlin. So he was obviously a legendary, wise man who guided King Arthur, who was the great Celtic king who repelled the Saxon invaders. But of course, in Kali Yuga, everything declines. This is just the natural effect of time. It's no one's particularly at fault here. What happens in the great cycles of time is that there's a beginning, which is like springtime, and there's a growth period, and then everything goes into decline, like autumn and down into winter. These are the great cycles of time. So the linear model of time that we're presented with at school, it clearly doesn't make sense, because this idea that we've evolved from primitive beginnings and that our ancestors were, ignorant, woad-smeared savages, is completely contradicted by the sophistication of clearly what they left behind. And this has only become apparent in the last perhaps 50 or 60 years, when people have actually really investigated the engineering of Stonehenge and the history of Stonehenge, for instance. They see that these people were expert astronomers, they were expert surveyors, they were expert engineers, they were expert in so many
I have a
fields.
question though. About
Go on then, go ahead.
Stonehenge, they
Yeah.
when they say that it was built at a certain point that was before the Celts.
Yes.
So it was a
No,
different culture prior to the Celts.
so what culture? Who built it then? What did they say? Who built
Well,
it
I don't
before?
know. It's supposed to be a Neolithic culture. I can't remember who
Yeah.
they
So
are.
we have these categories of Stone Age, Iron Age. So there's an idea contemporary to the mainstream view that Stonehenge was built by people that we attribute as being Iron Age hunter-gatherers. But, can you tell me how Iron Age hunter-gatherers managed to carry 200 tons of bluestone from the Preseli's in Wales to Salisbury Plain? Can you tell me how they managed to align Stonehenge uh, on precisely the same latitude as Lundy Island in the Bristol Channel?
Well,
There's
yeah.
there's a there's a right angled triangle, which it runs from Stonehenge to Lundy Island. Then if you go north from Lundy Island, it goes up to Preseli in Wales.
Mhm.
That right angled triangle is exactly 2,500 times the size of the Station Stone Triangle within Stonehenge.
Wait,
And
so
what we're actually,
there's three
I've
sites
sent you
form
an
a
image of,
triangle.
yeah, those three sites form a perfect Pythagorean right angled triangle.
Also, there's not just like this one religious site, but they get three of them built separately that form an overall pattern of patterns.
Yes, I mean, I have sent you a map, but
Right.
I've studied these things for uh, 30 years or so, because the value for me in studying sacred geometry, when I started the podcast course, uh, my specialist subject was going to be the power of sound, because I chant the Hare Krishna mantra, And, I can appreciate how powerfully life transforming singing in groups is. And this is, this is the path that I follow. But I realise the power of sound is a very broad subject. So when Brian said, get a micro niche, I thought, well, I've studied sacred geometry. Actually, I'll make this really micro. I'll just focus on the sacred geometry of London. Because I stumbled across a book 30 years ago called Earth Stars, The City of Revelation by Chris Street.
I'm gonna write
Now
that down.
that book has been republished now as London City of Revelation. You can get it on Lulu. You can get a paperback version or an ebook, and it has been my sacred geometry handbook. And by some strange synchronicity, I went to a meeting down at Glastonbury. Glastonbury is an amazing place. I ended up being baptized there. This is
Really?
Years after I was initiated into the Hare Krishnas, which was January 1992. I just wanted to reaffirm my Christianity because my sister's Christian and her husband's a Christian minister. I just wanted to reassure them that I hadn't gone off on some wacky anti-Christian Hindu idol worshipping thing, but actually I still had great affection for Jesus. So anyway, I accepted, I had a baptism at the White Spring at Glastonbury. I don't know if you know Glastonbury at all.
I know that there was a pagan history to it. I know that there's obviously the music festival.
When you look into the history and the energy flow around Glastonbury Tor, it's got great. It's the local legend in Somerset is that Jesus travelled to Glastonbury as a child.
Huh.
His uncle was Joseph of Arimathea, who was in the tin trade, who was an extremely wealthy man. Joseph of Arimathea held the position of decurion in the Roman hierarchy.
So he
He
visited
held
the
a
Tin
position,
Islands. That's what the
but yeah,
Carthaginians called it.
and Joseph of Arimathea also held a position as on the Sanhedrin, the Jewish High Council, and he also held a position among the Essenes, the ascetics living out in the desert. So he was an extraordinary man. But this was
Right.
Jesus's uncle. So Jesus was born into a royal
I
lineage.
have heard some interesting things about Jesus's. Like there was a sort of this religious society or something, and Mary Magdalene apparently was part of it, like a priestess for it or something.
Well, one of my god sisters, her name is Krishna Rose. She's just written a book called Woman in Red. And it's like
Huh.
she's written it as a historical fiction, kind of like in the first person, but it's coming from years of research. Mary Magdalene was actually the wife of Jesus, and she bore his child. And
Not
this is
his mother.
no. His mother was the name Mary is a status. It's like a position. So a woman could be a Mary. She could be promoted to the position of Mary. That's not necessarily the name she was given at birth. So a
Right.
Mary is basically a high priestess in the ancient Jewish religion. But
Oh, I didn't know that.
what we've seen, and of course what the Romans established was a patriarchal uh, religious hierarchy, and immediately they demeaned, Mary Magdalene as some sort of loose woman. Um, but the Roman Empire didn't decline. It simply, they just had a shift from emperors and senators to popes and cardinals.
I suppose that's one way of looking at it. They did
No,
technically decline, but their legacy just shifted to a new form.
but if you
Like
think
they
about,
had these sky gods, right? Sorry to interrupt, but
no, go on.
I'd like to go into like historically, there have been certain sky gods that are worshipped that have similarity. Whereas previously there used to be earth centered or even nature centered, female centered religion, chthonic, I think it's referred to as,
Okay.
as opposed to the sky gods, right? So if you look at Zeus, that's one example. You look at like Odin and Thor, like that's another. Then you look at Jupiter is obviously just a bit like Zeus, but if you look at the meaning, apparently they all mean Skyfather. Like literally, they just literally just mean that Skyfather.
Okay.
Even the Tengri god, even Tengri is means Skyfather. Like it's really interesting how it all seems to be an Indo-European thing.
Yeah, there are definite parallels. I think Zeus in the European tradition is Indra, who's said to be the king of heaven. So
So
yeah,
what's
he
the
would.
link between Indra and so who is Indra to the Hare Krishnas?
Indra, he's one of the chief demigods. So the Hare Krishnas teach, the Vedas teach that there's a universal administration, 330 million demigods. They're in charge of the universe, basically.
Are they
Um,
space beings that administer Earth?
it's said that each of them has their own planets. You know, there's a vast number of planets out there. The Vedic conception of the universe is that all of the planets are inhabited, but you would be talking about inhabited on frequencies that we can't tune into. You know, a bit like ultraviolet light or ultra, you know, beyond our
Right.
visible and audible spectrum. But those beings are so powerful that they can interact. They can, and they have
Like Venus.
interacted. They have interacted with human beings on Earth, and they have visited Earth frequently up until the time of Krishna, was 5,000 years ago. And because Vedic culture has pretty much disappeared, the demigods don't come and visit anymore. But yeah, those visits by demigods would be interpreted in modern times as you know, aliens coming to Earth. You know,
Maybe
highly.
there's not really a difference. Maybe it's both.
There's no difference. Yeah,
That's interesting because
but
I mean
but,
there
but
are
I,
alternative explanations for there are that what you described has a lot in common with certain, I suppose you could say, new age ideas that have become quite popular on the internet recently, especially well not just recently, but more so recently. So there's for example, there was in the 80s, there was a essentially an attempt to scientifically use a scientific method on channeling, on which is supposedly which is channeling a spirit and noting down or recording the information that comes through. And often the voice is different. Now I'm not going to be able to prove for you scientifically that it's valid, but you kind of that's up to you to what you believe. But the what came from it was this idea. One example of channeling was done by a being that called itself Ra
uh-huh.
and was describing basically a view of a perspective of reality about how it works. He said he originally came from Venus and that they had an ascension to another level of existence to like what he called the from the density of choice that we're on now, well, leaving into the age of Aquarius to the density of love, which is the density above us. The idea is that's seven of them. And you were talking about these different frequencies that the Vedic tradition talks about. And
Uh-huh.
certainly what he described has a lot in common with the Vedic idea of reality, that there's these different frequencies. Even Tesla talked about frequencies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that different beings can live at different levels, and you might not be able to notice life at different levels.
Uh-huh.
So Ra claimed to be at the sixth level uh, at the time of the Ra material was recorded.
Okay.
Uh, so what was laid down is essentially the law of one, which is the idea that all reality is one whole, like conscious energy,
Okay.
and that we have these on Earth that we incarnate into bodies where our soul, our energetic, we are energetic beings, and we are souls that are little fragments of the overall creator.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And that our souls are embodied in our bodies on Earth. And that, honestly, it just seems like just a different explanation to the Hare Krishna thing, but
It's,
ultimately
it's,
the
that,
same thing.
no, it's actually not so different.
Yeah.
The fundamental truths are pretty much the same, that we're eternal souls. I mean, the science of the soul was expounded perfectly in Bhagavad Gita 5,000 years ago. Krishna, this is Bhagavan Sri Krishna, God Almighty himself, spoke this philosophy. And Gita means song. Bhagavad
Okay.
Gita literally means the song of Bhagavan.
So
And
frequency.
so he's presenting the human race with the ladder, if you like, of the yoga system. And yoga
Okay.
means to unite. So there's different ways of uniting with God. You know, there's the physical, the hatha yoga. There's the mental, the gyan yoga or Gnosticism. And then through heart, through the path of love. And he says, ultimately, you can know me partially. This is Brahman realization as the all-pervading. You know, this is the philosophy of oneness. We are all one.
Yeah.
Everything is interconnected. But he said, you can know me on a higher level as Paramatma or super soul that resides in the heart of every living entity. And yeah, a lot of yogis aspire for this level of realization. And when they get there, it gives them extraordinary mystical powers. And it's quite clear when we look at the story of Jesus, when there's stories of him, they can make themselves lighter than the light. They can make themselves tiny. They can multiply their forms.
So he could walk on water.
So when we hear of Jesus walking on water, and it's quite consistent because it's I mean, this is outside the Orthodox Roman
Scientific.
Christian teachings, but it's fairly apparent that Jesus was educated not only by the Druids of England. All of the crowned heads of Europe used to send their sons. There was a whole load of universities in Britain before the Romans came.
Really? So there's this whole trade network where and then this whole network where people send people to Britain to educate.
There were 30 established universities in Britain before the time of the Romans. I can give you a list.
So,
But it's also apparent that Jesus traveled to India because the Bible tells us that Jesus was born, then he attended a wedding when he was 12, then he's 30, then he preaches for a year, and then he's crucified. And they don't tell us much about what happened between the age of 12 and 30, but it's apparent that he got some kind of phenomenal education, which is entirely consistent with him being educated by the Druids, the great wise sannyasis of
so
Britain.
when was
And
he? Would people be able to find the list of those different universities?
I can send it to you. It's you
Well,
can.
no, I mean for the listeners.
Um, I'm just trying to think where that's online. You could just Google Druid universities and see what that comes up
I
with.
suppose so.
There's a classic list. Oh, Gildas is a famous monk and commentator. I think he gave I think from the 5th or 6th century. I think there's a list of universities that he may have made. He's one. The lists were recorded back in history. We have to remember that when the Romans invaded Britain, they set out to totally destroy. They were on a frenzied mission of book burning.
So they knew more than we think they knew about this sort of thing.
Well, Caesar, the different emperors have acknowledged the genius of the Druids, but they also sent their soldiers over to slaughter them. Famously, the Druids had their headquarters at Anglesey in North Wales. These were unarmed men, and the Romans sent their soldiers up there just to slaughter them, and they slaughtered them wholesale. They just murdered them basically. This wasn't a battle between warriors. This was Roman soldiers slaughtering priestly old men in the most cowardly fashion. And the Romans, and we're told how glorious the Romans were. Well, they weren't. We're told that the Romans built our roads across Britain. Well, they didn't. They paved over existing chariot tracks.
Were they straight roads, the chariot tracks?
Well, yes, if you think about it, if Britain is invaded, and the King of Britain needed to call his warriors from all over the country, obviously straight roads would be very helpful. The first time the Romans tried to invade Britain was I think it was about 50 BC.
Yeah.
I remember, this is the Roman army. They swept across Europe and no one could resist them.
Well,
They,
there was
but
obviously a lot.
let me just say, they when they got to Britain, they landed their ships in Kent, but because the British saw them coming, and we have the advantage of having an island here, they got halfway across Kent, they got pinned down and repelled by the British, by superior forces, basically,
Yeah.
because the Celtic warriors were renowned, massive. There was a time in history when the Celtic warriors actually sacked Rome, but they weren't particularly interested because the Celts were nomadic. So once they got into Rome, and it's like, okay, we've defeated the Romans. Oh well, all right, well let's go now. We've done that.
Well, they weren't
And they
entirely
left it.
nomadic. They had cities and walls. I think what's happened is they had war bands that went out on war parties and then came back.
But famously, they would also have, they would we don't see much physical history of it because they would set up, they would be like cities or towns, but they would
Wooden.
be like wooden structures that,
Yeah.
that wouldn't, stand the test of time. They didn't build with stone particularly.
Yeah. Yeah. Though, I mean, he was busy, Julius Caesar was busy fighting the Gauls at the time. And there was this rebellion. I think he was having trouble fighting the Britons anyway. And then there was this rebellion in Gaul he had to go back for. And that was Vercingetorix, I think, was rebelling. And he had a lot of trouble. It was a close run thing. I'm not going to get too much into it because that's a different subject. And
We could go off on a tangent
yeah,
there, couldn't
yeah.
we? So basically the point I'm making is that the version of history that we get in our British schools and in textbooks is very much the conqueror's version of history that glorifies the Romans and minimizes, the Celts who were eventually overrun and defeated. And the last of the great Celtic Vedic kings was Arthur II in the 6th century, whose Druid sannyasi advisor was the celebrated Merlin. Now, this wasn't a wizard chanting incantations. This was a senior sannyasi advisor, and what he would have been chanting was Vedic mantras. So, this has been my subject matter also for the last 36 years, is the potency of Vedic mantras.
Would you say that we've had a sort of conqueror's world order focused on power as opposed to oneness and
Yeah,
love?
this is always the way of tyrants, is to have power over people. And of course they have to present themselves in a way to make it look as if the people want them. So, false democracies. I mean, what does democracy actually mean? Swami Prabhupada, who brought the Hare Krishna movement to the world in the 1960s, he said democracy means demon crazy.
Okay. So, I mean, especially
And
when you get these money lenders determining how it works rather than if there's big money manipulating it, obviously it's not.
if we're going to be honest, democracy means whoever has got the most money, guns, manpower, and media influence at their disposal, by virtue of being very rich.
I would say though,
These people are going to dictate policy, and that's the reality that we're living under
my
at the moment.
perspective is it depends on the prevailing frequency, I suppose, of society. So if you've got a society where the majority of people are stuck in their ego, then what you're going to get is egoic governance. And any system isn't going to work properly when the participants who are ruling aren't, or the the people it draws upon aren't going to be um wise and enlightened. If you consider how stuck in a ego we've gotten, um there's the whole idea of the left brain and the right brain, and how we get so focused on the left brain, which is all about, it's more, I guess it's more overtly logical but less creative and spiritual. And when we're
If
stuck in that, we're missing out on an aspect of ourselves that we're probably missing out on, the Krishna consciousness, or whatever you Christ
absolutely that, I mean,
consciousness.
any godless culture is always going to be spiraling downhill. If you look at the prevailing political systems of the 20th century, when the workers seized power, they established communism. When the merchants, when the rich people seized power, they established capitalism. When the military type people, the warrior type people established power, they established
Ginger.
fascism.
Or
And
yeah.
when the intellectuals, who have great ability to manipulate and influence society, when they establish power, what you have is a kind of, what would you call it? Well, something that would very strongly resemble the rather top heavy EU administration.
Yeah, and there's also people, I'm not sure, I mean, I don't want to get too ideological about this, because the whole my
Bureaucracy.
podcast is not being stuck in ideology, but
No,
there has been this tendency of late, especially where certain, in social sciences, where there's this people talk about postmodernism, and um, people talk about the critical school. I'm not going to get too much into that whole discussion because it's quite polarizing. But yeah, there's definitely been academia having a big influence on things. And because people look up to science and academia like priests now, it's like when young people go to university, they learn this stuff, and it's just what they accept, just like in the past we would accept it from priests. And we talk about, there's different, we see different orders from different types of, ruled by different sorts of power structures. But if we're all stuck in the ego, it doesn't matter what it is, it's going to fail in one way or another.
but this is the world that we've been born into,
Yeah.
and this particular time in history, this is what is termed as the Kali Yuga. So in the great cycles of time, there's like spring, summer, autumn, winter. This is like a winter season. So everything goes into decline. But this is also the most blessed age. And not just because it's a Kali Yuga, there are 1,000 cycles of these 4 yugas in a day of Brahma. A day of Brahma being 8.64 billion years long. And
Huh.
it's said that 1 in 1,000 Kali Yuga, this is where God incarnates in person, as he did 5,000 years ago. But when he comes for a second time, as he did 500 years ago, and we haven't got to this yet, when Krishna appeared in the mood of his female half, Sri Radha, when he appeared in her mood, this was a contemporary to Henry Henry VIII. We're
Oh.
talking 1486 to 1534 was the life of Lord Chaitanya, Krishna Chaitanya, and when he incarnated, he completely changed the world. He started the chanting of Hare Krishna, but he started a revolution. So this is the 1 in 1,000 Kali Yugas when God descends in the mood of his female half, like the mother goddess, if you like.
So what was this guy's name officially, in the 1400s?
Lord Chaitanya.
Lord
Chaitanya,
Che-
Chaitanya, Lord Chaitanya.
was
So
it
he,
Chaitanya or
Chaitanya.
it should autocorrect anyway in Google or something. Yeah, I
So
mean, that's
so basically what I'm saying is at this particular time in history, it's so momentous because what he was bringing, it was an opportunity for all human beings to enter the highest level of the spiritual world by the simplest method of chanting God's holy names. And it doesn't have to be the Hare Krishna mantra. It can be any name of God you know in any culture, or Om. These things will all help you. But he specifically gave Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, as the definitive mantra by which you could access the highest level of the spiritual world. And my experience of this, and my faith has been built on experience, is I was told that if you chant this mantra, God will appear to you. And this is an extraordinary statement, but I can say that, well, yeah, he didn't appear to me directly, but he did appear to me in the form of my spiritual master, who was such a potent personality that when I eventually met His Divine Grace, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, in Krishna's birthplace in India in 1991, I could straight away, this person knew me better than I knew myself. I felt like he was looking at my soul. He was so extraordinary. And he just radiated pure love. And, you know,
Wow.
I've been trying to follow his teachings for the last 30 years now.
How's
It's
it
not an
gone?
easy path, but this is a path of, any spiritual path is a path of honest self-examination
Oh yeah.
and self-correction. You know, it's not about, you know, going out there and preaching to the world and saying, oh, I've been saved and now I'm going to save you. You know, the fact is we have to do the real hard work is to purify our own consciousness. But when someone has progressed very far on this path and become very pure by following that process, you know, and they may be Christian, they may be Muslim, they may be Jewish, they may be Hindu, they may be Rastafarian, they may be Sikh, they may be following any, but it's basically the same process. That you develop a personal relationship with God. And when someone is very advanced like that, then they can really help others.
You
So,
think early
you know, someone,
Christianity was like that?
someone who is a self-realized master, and certainly Jesus is accepted. You know, Swami Prabhupada said, we accept Jesus as our guru. You know, no problem. Clearly, he's a saint, a pure lover of God, an incarnation, if you like.
That's
And
tolerant spirituality.
no harm to worship Jesus the same as God, because he's a perfect representative of God. And you know, the only difference we have with the Christian religion really is that the Christian idea is that God has only incarnated once as his own perfect son. The Vedic version is that God constantly incarnates as his perfect sons and daughters, you know, representing him perfectly. They're always here to be found. They're very rare.
Though in a
But yeah,
sense we all have, the idea is that we all have that divine spark within us, every soul.
yes, yes. So that the path is known as the path of self-realization. So it's not a matter of self-improvement, because self, in the ultimate sense, is already perfect. So any spiritual process is like unpeeling the onion layers of, you know, illusion, or, you know,
Yeah.
bad habits,
So it's
simple.
aligning with who you really are.
Yeah, basically, if I was to describe in simple terms the whole spiritual journey, it's from who you think you are in your head to who you really are in your heart.
Hmm.
And although that journey sounds like, you know, only 12 inches long or whatever, you know, that's actually the whole spiritual journey, is from the illusion of identifying with the body and mind, because both of these things are external.
How would
Except,
this,
go on.
would you say this fits in with the chakras
Absolutely.
from root to heart, or and then beyond?
Yes, because when you know, energy is constantly flowing around the body.
Right.
So we want to be situated in our heart. So when you can harmonize the heart and mind, then you're really moving in your spiritual life. So, you know, if our mind is somewhat different from our heart, you know, the heart's propensity, the heart is where the soul lives in the body, if you like, but
Right.
consciousness is spread around the body through the bloodstream. So the heart is pumping out consciousness in the form of blood. So that's how we have a sense of consciousness. Where am I going with this?
Well, somewhat good, I guess. It's good content.
It's this is the whole of I can tell you a two-line mantra which it contains more knowledge about who I am and about who you are and who we all are than this is
All right.
the entire Vedic scriptures can be extrapolated from this mantra. And
Well,
I'll
read it
say
out.
it's in beautiful Sanskrit.
Go ahead.
Jivara Svarupa Hoya Krishnera Nityadas Krishnera Tatasta Shakti Beda Beda Prakash. So that is a fundamental, this is Jiva Tattva, this is an eternal truth concerning the fundamental and intrinsic nature of the soul. Jivara Svarupa Hoy. Svarup is our intrinsic spiritual form. The Jiva is the soul. So,
Right.
so the intrinsic spiritual form of the soul is Nitya Krishna Das. Nitya Das means eternal servant, Krishna of God. Jivara Swarupa Krishnera Nitya Das, Krishnera Tatasta Shakti, that we are the marginal energy, Tatasta Shakti. Shakti means energy or
Marginal.
potency. Marginal Tatasta. Tata means like the bank of a river between the water. That point between the water and the bank is Tata.
What does that
So
mean then? What does it mean that we are?
we're marginal energy. Basically, it means that although we are parts and parcels of God, we're intrinsically the same as God in quality. We're not the same in quantity. So we're not the
Right.
whole. We're like sparks compared to the sun, if you like. So
It's
we're
just about how
sparks.
much of that holy, of that divine
So,
spark
so,
or fire that we have.
yes. So to finish the mantra, Jivara Tatasta Shakti, Beda Beda Prakash. Now this is the central mystery. We're prakash, we're manifestations that are Bed Abed, which means both different to God and non-different from God, meaning that we're different from God in that we're tiny, we're infinitesimal, and he's the totality, and uh, we're non-different in that, yeah, we're essentially the same quality as God, and that applies to every single living soul. So there's no such thing as old souls and young souls. All souls have always existed. And to put it into, I had the privilege of helping to render a version of Bhagavad Gita into English. And I spent 8 weeks in India. This was in the millennium year,
Right.
when we crossed in 2000. I was out in India praying for service. And one of my senior godbrothers, Tridandi Maharaj, as he is now, he's a sannyasi monk. I was praying for service and he came to me, it happened within minutes. So I'm looking for help with doing this book. Anyway, I ended up spending 8 weeks living in Vrindavan, which is Krishna's birthplace in India, his home village. And I was rendering Bhagavad Gita into English. And it's a very, very profound book. I mean, 700 verses of Sanskrit. But I decided to put it into a poem as I heard it. And I won't speak the whole thing, but I'll just speak the first few verses, if that's okay, that I
Oh yeah.
remember. Song of Bhagavan. There never was a time when we did not exist, nor shall there be. We live for all eternity. Your spirit soul, you'll never die. You can't be killed, and nor can I. Human life in mortal frame is one brief scene in nature's game where you get to play a leading role. Now's the time to learn about yourself, the soul, life's deepest meaning and its goal. There's a subjective evolution alongside human devolution, whereby the soul can truly rise beyond birth, growth, and demise. All that's born will surely die. All civilizations, however high achievements climb, fall crumbling at the feet of time, who springs from me, a mere particle of my energy. I am the source of time and space, inviting you to take your place in the eternal family home you've heard about but never known. I'm the taste in water and music's tune, the fiery sun and nectar-filled moon that nourishes all vegetation. I am the source of all creation. It goes on and on. Basically, I was trying to summarize Bhagavad Gita,
That's
and
really
it
good.
only scratched the surface, but that just gives, it's an affirmation of our eternality as souls. And, you know, I was paraphrasing Krishna as best as I could, but there's potency in those words because I'm paraphrasing God's words. But I mean,
Yeah.
I can quote one or two verses from Bhagavad Gita, like the concluding verse of Bhagavad Gita: Sarva Dhammam Parityaja Mamekam Sharanam Braja Aham Tvam Sarva Papebayo Mokshayishami Mashuchaha. Krishna himself spoke those words 5,000 years ago, just prior to the Battle of Kurukshetra. And what that means is abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender yourself to me. And do not be afraid, because I will protect you from all sinful reaction. That's the concluding verse of Bhagavad Gita. This is God telling us, give up religion and just give yourself to me.
So what's the difference between religion and this kind of spirituality?
Well, there's bona fide religion, and there's religion that is used as you know, for political advantage or whatever. You know, we know full well. You know, you know, our, what's his name, Richard
Dawkins?
Dawkins. You know, he's spoken at length about this, and a lot of what he says is true. Although he's a rabid, God-hating atheist, a lot of what he says is true about the abuses of religious institutions over the years. But what he's describing is abusive religious institutions,
And that's not to be conflated with, well, all belief in spirituality
that
is
doesn't.
toxic, which seems to be the prevailing belief.
Well, yeah, and that's what's you know, that's, and then in the name of science, then you know, we're told, you know, so then we're told that, you know, we're just simply, yeah, Dawkins describes us as happy chemical accidents. We came here by accident. You know, some chemicals just fused together and they happened to form a microbe in a muddy pond billions of years ago, and that microbe mutated into 8 million uh, entirely different, you know, beautiful and interdependent species by a process known as, I don't know, natural selection or whatever. And when you actually look into it, well, it doesn't make sense. Um, and basically, mutations don't create more complex organisms.
And the chance of it happening at a certain rate would take, well, trillions of years or something, compared to the
So,
amount of
so
time it's
that's
happened in. It maybe if
so
there's,
that's a theory that's been put forward by a certain group of people. You know, funnily enough, I grew up in Orpington. Well, I moved to Orpington when I was 25, but one of my local villages, I used to go and drink in the Queen's Head in Down village in Kent, and that's where Charles Darwin lived.
no.
Darwin House was just down the road, um, and Darwin's theory wasn't actually propounded by him in the first place. It was received from his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, who was, you know,
Oh.
known to be, you know, very high up in the Freemasons. You know, these are
So
highly
Darwin
privileged.
was just fitting it into the scientific requirements at the time, but he already had the vague idea or the approximate idea of evolution of souls, right? Or not souls,
Well,
maybe not of souls, but evolution generally.
yeah, you know, Darwin. You know, he wrote a very interesting book. You know, on, what was it? The origin of, what was it?
Species.
Origin of Species. That's right. But you know, when you actually analyse the book, and I have looked at the book, it's extremely vague. It's like a room full of smoke, really. It doesn't actually explain how any species originated. He just puts forward a theory. But the thing is, Darwin's theory has great appeal for anyone with an atheist ideology. So, you know, his ideas were immediately embraced by Karl Marx. You know, that spawned godless communism, and very much embraced, you know, in the Western world. So we've had godless communism and godless capitalism and godless fascism.
You know,
You
what's
know,
interesting
and
about sorry, carry on.
no, so you know, and the eugenics horrors
Oh yeah.
of the Nazis. I mean, actually, the country that promoted eugenics more than, you know, before the Nazis was Britain.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
the early 19th century, the late 19th century, early 20th century, like eugenics was a very popular idea.
so you know, but they justified their ideas, you know, by
Science.
interpreting, you know, Darwinism as survival of the fittest,
And there's like, well, we're more successful. I guess we're superior race then, right?
so you
That's
know,
the logic.
so yeah, it's just been used as an idea to justify, you know, the superiority of white Europeans over, you know, the people whose countries we've conquered, and it's appalling. You know, it's a racist legacy that we should all, you know, well, I don't feel ashamed of it because I didn't do it, but you know,
Yeah.
it's Britain became very rich on, you know, slave trading, drug dealing, you know, just stealing from other countries, you know, 200 years in India. But this is where it gets interesting, Nick. I've got to tell you this.
All right.
Britain set up by occupying India for 200 years. And, you know, Britain went there and just stole everything they could lay their hands on. You know, that's what happens, isn't it? When, you know, you invade you send your soldiers in, you nick all the jewels and all the resources, everything you can get hold of. But what Britain did was they set up a massive karmic reaction.
Oh,
And I think the great sages of India must have been sitting back and thinking, well, you'll pay for this one day, Britain. And the price that Britain is paying for stealing India's treasures is that now the real treasures of India, which had nothing to do with, you know, India was the richest country in the world 500 years ago, literally the richest
right.
country in the world. And it was plundered successively by the neighboring Muslims and then the British, who were worse plunderers than the Muslims.
Yeah.
And anyway, so the karmic reaction to stealing all of India's treasures is that now India's real treasures, which is the Vedas, you know, the knowledge of India that has been preserved for thousands of years, is now being distributed worldwide in the English language. And
Yeah, but that's not really
that's been happening since the 60s.
that's a
And
kind of a good thing though, isn't it? From my
it's a
perspective.
fantastic thing, yeah, but because everything is happening, everything is unfolding under God's supervision.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, if
I
we
mean,
look at the
I
Law of
really,
One stuff too, that would be ultimately the same thing, just in a different description, which means if we're coming into this awakening spiritually that's going on, and there's a city of revelation. Oh, we haven't really talked about that yet, have we?
we can go. I just want to add something. I just want to say, you know, it's been a very interesting uh, development over the last, uh, few decades. I mean, and I've read David Icke's books, and I've been a bit of a fan. But I would take him to task on constantly repeating the idea that there is a pyramid of power, a hierarchy of power, and the rich people are at the top of it. And certainly we can see, yeah, the Rothschild family, you know, they
They're
control the
rich.
bank, they control the banking system, you know, they own Reuters and Associated Press, you know, so that all of the syndicated news stories are also controlled by the Rothschild family. And then we can look at the Rockefeller family. They've made, you know, billions and trillions on oil and
It's called the cabal, the
medicines.
idea that these different families that all
Yeah, so
come
you
together.
know, I'm only mentioning those two families because they're the most famous. It's not that
Right.
there aren't other families, but I would take David Icke task on the idea of constantly repeating that they're running the world and they're controlling everything. because they are absolutely not running the world and they are absolutely not controlling everything. They would
Weren't
like
they
to.
before? Well, the way I see it is like a
People,
constant attempt to control things, but the world's gonna
yeah,
be chaotic. You can't control everything when it's
of course
so.
you can't.
So it's like there's this constant attempt to control things, while constantly things are going out of their control.
So
I
yeah, but
heard
whether they,
though that there was
but, with,
the head of the it's been cut off the snake, so to speak. That's what some
but
people were talking about recently.
the only, the only way that someone has control over any of us is if we accept and believe that they have
Ah,
control over us.
oh, right. So he's
That's like
perpetuating the
programming, isn't
idea.
it?
That's why. Do you think that's why some people think that David Icke is like a plant or something?
Well, I like him. I'll say that first of all. I think he's a brave man, but
Yeah, yeah.
I
I don't
think
think it's.
I think he's also he's a conditioned soul. This isn't a self-realized saint. This is a sportsman who's become a TV
And
presenter for
he's
the
angry,
BBC.
right? You can see the anger there.
Well, he's become, his career shift was he's become an announcer. He was an announcer for the BBC, and now he's an announcer for the New World Order. And what he's actually been doing, and I think he may well have been, I don't think he's consciously doing it. I think he's probably been manipulated by people who are much smarter than him. He's basically become an announcer for the New World Order. He's become their number one predictive programmer. So he's told people 10, 20, 30 years in advance what the New World Order are planning to do. So he's releasing the information like a safety valve, at the same time adding content to his books, which makes him sound ridiculous, out on the fringe, easily dismissed. So it's a very interesting role he's taking.
So how does
And
someone avoid coming off that? How does someone avoid ending up playing that kind of role when you're interested in um this new spirituality or old spirituality? It's kind of both.
but the so he promotes a philosophy whereby he says infinite love is the only truth and everything else is illusion. And he will stand up on stage and say, I am all that was, is, and ever will be. Well, he's not, is he? He's
Well,
not
he
all
means
that.
him, but also you. But
But what he's talking about is a level of Brahman realization, if you like, and
oh,
that's bona fide. That's okay. I don't have a problem with that. He can proclaim his divinity. We're all divine beings,
right.
essentially. But he's not the totality of all existence. He's one individual soul. Anyway, I don't want to criticize David Icke. I think he's soldiering on and he's helping people wake up. He's
Yeah.
helping people make a transition. What he's not doing is reinforcing people's faith in God. He's not acknowledging that actually at the top of the pyramid power of power is God.
There's a
At the
different
top.
pyramid. There's a fake pyramid of like power, and then there's the pyramid of divinity, I suppose, and that's different. I mean, the Law of One describes it as you start off on the first level of density would be just objects that have their own soul within them. They're trying to master just simply being, right?
Mhm.
Like a stone would be that sort of level. Which is simply about, well, how do you be, right? The next level is, I can't remember what it's called, but it's the density where of animals essentially.
Mhm.
You know how that is. It's about survival and that sort of thing. And yeah, and then beyond that, then we get the third level, the choice level, where we choose: are we choosing? Are we serving others and how are contributing to helping others and being part of a larger whole with love, or are we focusing on our own divinity as an individual and getting others to worship us, which is the selfish way of doing it. It's not really the true path, but it's part of, I suppose, if it exists, it must be the universe's plan for it to exist. So there must be a reason. And the idea of the law of one is that the universe learns to understand itself better through our experiences, and in some way it must learn and learn about itself through selfish actions as well as selfless actions. So that's why there's these two paths. And the idea is that souls then start incarnating on a fourth level, either in the negative path or the positive path. Right? And that would be the level of love. Was it love of yourself or is it love of others? And obviously, most people would probably choose love of others, serving others, and all that sort of thing. Then beyond that, there's the level of wisdom. That's fifth. Then the next level is unity. Is it unity? I'm not sure the next level is, but this idea that if it's no longer polarized between helping others and helping yourself, but rather a sort of unity of the two. And then there's the seventh level, which is like the divine level, I suppose. And the idea is it's fractal, so it just repeats itself. So if you go to the next level up, that's the bottom level of the next octave, which is talking about sound and frequency. So that's really interesting. It probably has a lot in common with what you're talking about.
Well, this is, I mean, we've come on to the BBC, and yeah, we've come on to sound frequencies. When I asked my spiritual master how to pronounce the syllable Om, because and straight away he said, "Oh, this sound created the universe," and then he broke down that sound, the syllable Om, is comprised of three syllables,
right,
which is Ah, the creator, U, all of creation, or this is God and Goddess, if you like, and which is all living beings, all souls. So when those three sounds combine together, and that speeds up into Om. That's an extremely powerful sound. And yes, he said that the whole universe was created from this sound. So this is the Vedic version of creation, is that God created the universe by sending this sound down into the, I think it's called the Mahat Tattva, the material energy. And then that sound being imbued with all of God's knowledge and wisdom caused all of the material energy to form into the universe and all living beings. And then he creates like Lord Brahma, who's like the secondary creator, and he leaves Lord Brahma to create all the species. And Krishna himself, he doesn't involve himself with the day-to-day running of the creation. He delegates to 330 million demigods, and he's off running around in the forest playing with his friends. And he's inviting us into that world. So to summarize his mission at this time, he's saying, look, chant my holy names and I will appear to you before you as a teacher, and I will teach you how to enter my world.
So the next world is a playful, loving world.
Yes, there are many levels. I mean, there are multiple universes for a start. There are multiple material universes, infinite numbers. And just to get an idea of the scale of God, one of Krishna's expansions, Mahavishnu, is described as lying on the causal ocean, and universes are emanating from the pores of his skin. That's mind-blowing, isn't it? Universes from the pores. Hang on a minute, we can't even think on that scale. But ultimately, God has a human-like form, and some people will say that God is formless, which is true. It means he has no material form, but he has a spiritual form, and we as individual souls have spiritual forms.
Yeah.
And when we realize those spiritual forms through the internal process of self-examination, self-correction, and self-realization, it has to be under guidance. Basically, if you want to enter the spiritual world, you need to take shelter of someone who already lives there. And you don't have to die to enter the spiritual world. You can enter that place while you're still alive. And then when death comes, you won't even notice. You'll be gone from your body already, because you'll have no attachment to the body. You won't be identifying as either your body or your mind. So to explain the process of reincarnation, it's, you've probably heard this, that some people can remember previous lives.
Oh, yeah.
So what happens at the time of death is that the soul is carried into the next body. So we leave the gross body behind, but the subtle body, which is comprised of mind, intelligence, and false ego, that subtle body is what carries the soul into the next body. So that's how we can have memories of previous bodies. It's all in there. And, these things can be accessed sometimes by hypnosis, but it's been well documented. I think Dr. Ian Stevenson is the highest authority on this subject. He investigated thousands of children who still remembered their previous lives, and he went and checked them out, and they were able to prove conclusively, what families they were in previously and how they died, and the families that they went back to. This was all out in the Middle East.
Yeah, and mainstream science can't explain it.
No, but the most, the thing is to accept. Well, actually, that's the most logical explanation, isn't it? Otherwise, how can these children possibly have that knowledge? So
We're
why
taught
don't we
that
just
there's
accept them?
only atoms, right?
Because the thing is, God and reincarnation and the eternality of the soul and the soul itself, these things don't fit in with mechanistic, reductionistic science, which is extremely limited in its scope. Empirical science is based on, observation and experimentation. But it has, it's great for what it can do, but it has extreme limitations when it comes to, for instance,
There's consequences.
mainstream science does not acknowledge the existence of subtle matter. It exists that there is it acknowledges that there is a mind and there is intelligence and there is an ego, but it doesn't actually quantify what these things are. And there are three things not taught within our education system. What is life? What is love? And who is God? Now, would you not think that those things are fairly fundamental, and we all have a right to know?
Pretty important, but I suppose the idea is that
What is life
Christianity
is
or what
pretty
have you does
important.
that.
Pardon me?
The idea is that religion would do that, but I suppose they teach us that it's not real, that stuff. So we grow up in a
Listen,
godless existence.
religion, for the most part, religious institutions are just man-made institutions used to exert power and influence over people.
Yeah.
Western society was heavily controlled by the church until the 19th century, and this is what Darwin, this is the great, I appreciate, for whatever reason, Darwin helped society break free of the stranglehold of the church.
Okay.
But in doing so, in breaking free of the dogmas of the church in the 19th century through Darwinian philosophy, what happened is, the institutions that called themselves, institutions of science, they ended up promoting their own dogmas, and then, so instead of priests in black capes, you end up with scientists in white coats that effectively established an alternative priesthood.
Yeah, they're
And
experts,
frankly,
right?
just as useless as the, and they're promoting dogmas which are just as useless as the pseudo-religious dogmas pumped out by the church before them. But in the midst of all that, apart from all that, there is genuine religion. Science means knowledge. Science does not mean just one branch of knowledge or one empirical methodology for obtaining knowledge. Education, I did Latin at grammar school. The Latin word ducare means to lead. The Italian motorbike, Ducati, it's the present participle. Right. It means leading. That's what it means. Ducati means leading. So educare means to lead out. So to educate means to lead out of darkness into light.
So
what
that's the difference between leadership and authority. What is the difference? Is authority from light into dark?
No, authority is. I mean, ultimately, God is the authority.
Right.
I mean, in Vedic, the Vedic principle is that we accept God as the supreme authority, and we accept the Vedas as God's, God's guidebooks for humanity. You know, this great machinery of the universe. If it was a washing machine, which isn't a bad analogy actually.
Reality, the universe is a washing machine.
If the universe was a washing machine, the Vedas would be the instruction manual.
So they're like
And
how to wash the dirt out of you to become pure
exactly,
white.
exactly. And when Swami Prabhupada was confronted, when you can imagine when the Hare Krishnas first started, they were accused of being a brainwashing cult, and he just threw his head back and laughed, and he said, "Yes, I've come to help these young people wash their brains." Yeah. So, but the biggest part of the dirt that we have to wash out of our brains is the nonsense that we've been taught at school. And
Yeah.
great that we can learn to read and write, and there's so many interesting subjects. And I don't disrespect any form of learning, but the real fruit of knowledge is love. And if we
Right.
don't come to the platform of pure love as a result of our education, then something was missing from our education.
And it
If
was.
the only result of education is that we adopt a belief in life, that the only purpose of life is to earn money and buy things, which is, that's capitalism, isn't it?
Yeah, but
Um,
even more than that, we've got this nihilistic existence. It's just different forms of it, and you get people arguing over which form of nihilism. Like you get people who are on the left, people on the right, people authoritarian, liberal, what have you. There's all these different political tribes, for example, and people are just arguing with each other over it, but
yeah,
without
well,
a higher purpose. And so it's no wonder we're so divided without divinity in our lives. So, what would you say about politics? How can we learn to let go of ideology? What does the Hare Krishna, what do the Hare Krishna ideas teach us about the political aspect of things?
well, in one sense, everything's political, isn't it? I I
And
could tell
everything's
you
divine.
I could tell you about, I mean, this, the non, I joined, part of the appeal of the Hare Krishnas is they promote the idea of being non-sectarian,
Right.
on the basis of we're not this body. So not only should we not identify with the body, we should not identify with any religious group. I am not Christian, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist. I'm an eternal soul. We shouldn't identify with any political ideology. I'm not left wing, right wing. I'm not any nationality. And so it was a great appeal to me to join the non-sectarian Hare Krishnas. And of course, the great paradox of human dealings is that we take something pure and beautiful,
Yeah.
and under the guidance of a saint, we jump on board that ship, that institution, and that ship is sailing across the material ocean towards the spiritual world. As soon as that saint disappears, the crew are left somewhat confused, and the ship can steer off course. So the non-sectarian, I mean, it's a joke, but
Yeah.
a non-sectarian, a group with a non-sectarian ideology, this is getting Monty Python. This can go into like the Judean People's Front
Yeah.
and the People's
But
Front of
yeah.
Judea. It's
And now people are like
this.
fighting over the wheel, right? People are fighting over the wheel to turn the boat, and it's ending up steering into a storm. And that's what's
I,
going on right now.
but but the beautiful thing is, if you think in terms of cell division, this is growth, isn't it? Cells
Yeah.
divide. So there was one time in the Western world, one Hare Krishna institution, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, began in 1966 by one man, one penniless man, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, came from India at the age of 70, I believe, when he arrived in New York. He had a suitcase with a few books, and a little 3-tier cooker and about $20. And 11 years later, he had established 100 temples, ashrams, and farming communities all around the world.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, this is a true saint. I mean, he
What sort
was,
of farming communities are these?
where they look after cows and grow their own vegetables. Looking after cows, this is fundamental to Vedic society.
Why is that?
Because, you know, the cow is worshipped in India because the cow is Mother Earth personified. So basically, there is no more accurate index of our relationship, the quality of our relationship with Mother Earth, than how we treat the cow. So cow protection is fundamental. Any society that does not protect its cows is not considered to be civilized or even human. When you look at the
Not
McDonald's,
humane, I would say.
pardon me.
I mean, I wouldn't dehumanize a society, but not humane, certainly.
Well, as you like, but you know,
Yeah.
there are standards. Basically, there are
Yeah.
standards established in Vedic society, and to kill and eat animals for their flesh, just simply for either profit or pleasure, because there's certainly no nutritional benefit from doing so. To do so, if that's done, you know, on an individual level, it doesn't do you any good. But when slaughterhouses are open, and this is just fundamental to the entire economy, and when there are massive so-called farms, you know, that are just feeding most of our grains to animals, which is incredibly, you know, I'm sure you know the vegan vegetarian argument. You know, we waste so much
Yeah,
food.
but without
Right.
the spiritual aspect of it, some people have put forward the argument in a way that doesn't puts
All
people
right,
off.
let me cut right down to it then. So, to kill a cow is equated in the Vedas to killing your own mother.
Okay. I mean, the way I see it is that um I realized that I think it was I'm on blank about who actually swayed me on this, but I've I haven't actually stopped eating meat. I do eat less meat than I did before. Not quite as often. Fish and vegetarian dishes, a slight, 1 or 2 days a week or something. But like, we're basically it's for our own pleasure that animals are being killed. Now, technically speaking, you could say if you don't eat meat on an individual level, animals will still be killed. But on a collective level, it makes a difference.
Yeah, if we care about the ecology, you know, if we care about the environment, one thing that we need to do is to stop killing animals, because um, it, what we do, you know, it's massively destructive in terms of, you know, forests that are chopped down to create grazing areas. It's massively destructive in terms of what it does to our health. But the effect of eating meat is that it clouds our consciousness. So it's a
Are you-
massive
Okay.
obstacle on the
What if an animal
spiritual path.
dies? What if an animal dies of natural causes and you eat it?
Well, you know, that's then that's you're not incurring karma if you haven't killed the animal. But you know, that's not how the system works, is it? You know, it's like, oh, you know, this you don't go to the butchers and say, oh, this is a piece of meat from an animal that died of old age last week. You know,
Mm.
that's not how it works, is it? But yeah, less karma to eat, but best left alone. Basically,
It's a
and
sacrifice.
it's not enough on the path of Krishna consciousness. It's not enough just to be a vegetarian. It's not enough just to abstain from eating meat. Um, that's very good, but you're still effectively eating sin. If you just take even the purest fruit and vegetables and just eat them without any thought of where they're coming from, you're still incurring a sinful reaction.
What if
So
someone does? It almost sounds like you can't avoid it. So if
no. So,
anything,
so
maybe
to
the focus is to be spiritually focused on
so to
meditating and stuff
avoid,
like that.
Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, if one offers me a leaf, a fruit, a flower, or water with love, I will accept it. So the Vaishnavas, the Hare Krishna devotees, Vaishnava means servant of God, always offer their food. And this is a very powerful act. This is
Okay.
this is as important as the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. This is by offering your food to God with love, and anyone can do it. It's just say, oh, dear Lord, can I please offer this? But, it could be a bag of crisps, as long as it's something vegetarian at least. But please accept this, and just say a mantra, or dear God, please accept it. Very simple prayer. And if that's done with love and he accepts it, that transforms the quality of food, and that becomes the technical terms for unoffered food is bhoga, which means material enjoyment. And once food has been offered and accepted by the Lord, it then becomes prasadam, which means mercy. And then when you eat that food, it looks the same as any other food, but I had this direct experience of first eating at the Hare Krishna temple. I can remember now the taste of a cheese and broccoli pie at Soho Street Temple in London at the end of Oxford Street. This was back in 1984.
Right.
And I just thought, what did they put in that? I just feel like, whoa. And that woke me up. And
So
they have a restaurant downstairs and a temple upstairs. And I went
so
up to the temple, and and the rest is history.
so when you eat for your own pleasure, you don't get as much of it. Whereas if you eat and you dedicate it to the divine, and even if it's
Do it for his pleasure. Do everything for his
so,
pleasure.
it
This is
doesn't
what,
need to be vegan. You're saying, as long as you're not, as an animal isn't dying for it.
well, the thing is, Krishna in the spiritual world, Krishna is a transcendental cow herder. That's what he does. He takes his cows out to the forest every day, and with his other cowherd friends, and then they play in the forest all day, and then they
Do
bring
they
the
milk
cows
them?
home. The entire economy of Krishna's home village is based on milk products, but the cows are all
Ah,
loved. There's no cow slaughter there.
so that's why there's this very big thing of in India of what's that name of the Indian cottage cheese that they use in curries?
Oh, curd, uh, paneer.
Paneer, yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
And then there's ghee, which is often used for cooking as well.
yeah. Ghee is clarified butter. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like, I don't think it's ultimately necessary. You absolutely have to stop eating meat. And it's not like something to be ashamed of. But if you're
No,
going to try to at least have it not as often, you might be surprised at how you expand your diet with interesting meals you wouldn't expect that you actually quite
I,
enjoy.
I stopped eating meat when I was 25, and I'm 61 now, and I'm fit. I'm well. I do gardening. That's what I do for a living. I push lawnmowers, and I have a few gardening customers, and that's how I support my family.
So,
But I also live on a small holding, and my neighbour has about 12 cows. So and they're rescued cows, and he looks after them until they just die of old age. But it's such a beautiful thing to see. And these are big animals. He has cows and bullocks, and they're just so soft natured. And cows will even give milk when they're not in calf.
so
I mean,
would you recommend having someone has a cow as a pet?
it's no, it's not easy. It's really no. They don't. I mean, yeah, it would be lovely to see lots of little subsistence farms. I mean, go back in history and people did keep cows for their milk. That's how they got their milk. They kept a cow. But, you could have a dairy in a village, at least one dairy in every village where the cows are protected and looked after. But I fully support the vegan stance of being opposed to, yeah, commercial dairy farms, because it's all exploitation, isn't it? In
It's
force.
factory farming. It's in the word. It's just treating it like
Oh,
this.
it's horrific, and it's how
Yeah.
to extract as much money as possible by squeezing as much milk out of dairy cows as possible, and then when they stop yielding the milk, send them off to slaughter. It's just a stage before the slaughterhouse. The dairy industry, it's wicked, but
Yeah.
but when you get pure milk, given from cruelty free, given from cows, this is a completely different quality of milk. Pasteurizing milk kills it. Basically, all it does is extend its shelf life. but it kills off all of the natural, all of the nutritional value. There's still some, but it's most of it is gone. But just by pasteurization, this is a commercial process, and
And it's linked to the fact that it's done on a mass scale rather than on a more local scale.
yeah. So
Corporate nature of food and everything.
no, I think the way we're going, the way civilization is going, I think what's happened in this last year with this pandemic, whether you see it as real or fake, and ultimately this is a drama orchestrated by the Supreme Lord himself, so that the whole world can stop and just take stock. Where were we going? Where was our Western civilization going?
We have more time to think about it now.
Well, when they asked Gandhi, the famous spiritual leader of India, he managed to, through passive resistance, he managed to eject the British out of India in the 1940s and regain independence for India after 200 years of British tyranny in India. When they asked Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, I think it would be a good idea.
That's pretty clever.
Well, but basically just saying there is no such thing as civilization in the Western world. This is just
maybe Western organization.
Basically it's godless consumerism, whether we call it capitalism or communism or whatever, it's a combination of, what we've got at the moment is a combination of godless capitalism, godless communism and godless,
But that sounds like it's a pretty bad combination, isn't it?
Well, but it pretends to be democratic and we're allowed to make a pencil mark on a piece of paper once every 5 years so that we can pretend we all participate in it. It's nonsense.
I mean, people make a big deal out of these elections. But
I think Stalin had the last word on democracy, of all people.
Yeah.
And he said, power isn't held by the people who vote, but by the people who count the votes. And fairly cynical, but he cut right to the point that if popular vote was actually a real thing, we would have Jeremy Corbyn as prime minister because he was way more popular than everyone else, And let's not go there. But he was filling football stadiums with people who loved him. And Theresa May was going around and she needed a police escort because everyone hated her so much.
I mean, there are some. Yeah, there's.
Oh, and
obviously, I don't agree with socialism, but the old me that was more ideological is. Yeah, I think.
Ken Livingstone made the quip. If voting made any difference, they would have abolished it a long time ago.
That's interesting.
Cynical. But he was the mayor of London, and which gets us back to the point that our Brian Rose, our podcast course tutor, is himself running for the mayor of London, which is quite extraordinary as an American. But I think he'll pull it off as well. And
he does seem to care.
I look forward to it because he, and I don't want to get all sycophantic about Brian Rose. I don't really know him.
Yeah.
But I like him. He's dynamic, and I think he's genuine and caring. But I think what he's doing, and now we're coming to my subject matter about an hour into this interview.
Okay.
We're coming into London and London real and the reality of London.
Let's go into it.
So my podcast subject, if I can I talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, we can. I'm not hungry yet, so yeah, it's not lunch yet.
London, well, so I've decided, my micro niche will be the sacred geometry of London. So my podcast will be called London Revelation. I still haven't put up my first episode. We're in early days, aren't we? We're newcomers to this podcasting business, but I'm already excited. And this is my first interview, Nick, and this is like we've been right round the universe, haven't we?
Yeah, and I'm really enjoying
and out of the universe. We've got up to Mahavishnu and Krishna and So we're back to Earth. So we're back to
The
London.
universe is a washing machine, and now we're talking about the city of London.
Yeah, there you go. So, and yeah, we're in a process of cleansing our consciousness. And that is the process of realization, is that self-realization.
Right. So about this
When our
revelation.
consciousness is completely clean and we're free from all misconceptions regarding our identity and true nature, and under the guidance of someone who already lives in the spiritual world, we'll be allowed to enter that world as well. And that's on offer to 7.8 billion human beings at the moment. It really doesn't matter what you've done, where you've been, who you are, how wicked you are. This is on offer not only to the nice people. This is on offer to the wicked people. 500 years ago in India, there was these two brothers, Jagai and Madai, and they were the nastiest pair you could imagine. They were murderers, robbers. They were terrorizing the local community.
Yeah.
But they were there when Lord Chaitanya was present.
Right.
And Lord Chaitanya's brother, Nityananda, who's also known as Balaram in Krishna's pastimes, he went over to preach to them, and one of them smashed a clay pot over his head, and his head was bleeding.
Oh.
And Lord Chaitanya rushed to the spot. He heard about this, and he raised his supreme weapon, which is a spinning disc called the Sudarshan Chakra. And he was just about to kill them both. He just lost his temper. And Nityananda, who was lying on the floor with his head bleeding, he said, "No, brother. Uh, it, in this incarnation, you haven't come to kill the demons. You've come to educate them and show them your mercy and give them your love." And so Lord Chaitanya stopped in his tracks and he said, "Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, sorry, I just lost it there for a bit. This is God, They're very passionate.
So what
These
happened to
drama.
those two guys?
So anyway, so Lord Chaitanya infused the pair of these wicked demons with pure love. All he has to do is glance at someone, and that's it. They're purified. I mean, he could
Right.
walk through a forest, and the lions and the tigers and the bears would be chanting Hare Krishna. And this is God.
Right.
This is the creator of the universe. He can do anything. So those two, then they went from being, the most notorious wicked demons, to being great saints. And
Anyone
so
can redeem
basically,
themselves.
however wicked we are, God will forgive us as long as we turn ourselves in and surrender to him. Just stop chasing after money, fame, and all the glitters of the material world, because it'll all be gone anyway when we're dead. You can't take it with you. But what you can take with you is bhakti, which is pure love. So bhakti yoga is the ultimate yoga process, and prem, pure love of God, is the ultimate goal, and the ultimate method for progressing on the path of bhakti yoga is chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, under guidance. That mantra, like I said, with the Om, created the universe, and that mantra is powerful, but its full potency is not realized until you hear it from a self-realized soul. So I was
Okay.
given that mantra in 1992 by someone who has full realization of the mantra, someone who has an active relationship with God, someone who's realized his spiritual form in the spiritual world. So basically, a person like that has one foot in this world and one foot in the spiritual world. And, like Jesus, they come into this world, they incarnate, these great gurus, and they're here to rescue the human race. And next year, 2021, is the centennial year of my Guru Maharaj. He was born in 1921, and gradually throughout his life he became recognized as a great saint. I mean, in his
Oh.
youth he was a champion athlete. The police took him on. They like fit people, and by the time he was 25 he was a police inspector. This is Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, His Divine Grace. And then while he was in the police, he'd been raised with, he was actually a bhakta, a devotee of Lord Ram. who's the greatest king who ever lived, even greater
Oh,
than Krishna, actually. This is an earlier incarnation of Krishna. Lord Ram goes back 1.7 million years in history.
oh,
The Ramayana is the great drama that they constantly play out in history. There's a bridge between India and Sri Lanka. It's called Adam's Bridge. You can, and this has been acknowledged and photographed by NASA. This was the bridge that was built by Lord Ram's followers to go across to the demon Ravana's headquarters, so that they could send the army over and defeat that demon. And anyway, that's another story.
yeah.
But yeah, so he was raised in that tradition, and he was a big Ram Bhakta. But then he met devotees of Krishna, became convinced by them. I mean, at the time, you know, there was resistance against the British. I think it was Chandra Bose was taking up armed resistance against the British, and he was thinking to join them. Anyway, he was on a wanted list for a while, but he went to join a temple in Mathura, Krishna's birthplace. And when the police, you know, the British police eventually came round looking for him, his spiritual master said, "Look, he's changed his ways. He's just become a renunciant monk. Can you just leave him alone?" And they went away and they left him alone. This was
Yeah.
in the
That's interesting.
1940s. Yeah, and then, you know, and then he just practiced the path. And by 1990, I met him in 1991, and by that time he was 70, nearly 70 years. Oh yeah, he was 70 years old in 1991. And in 1996, he began a world tour following in the footsteps of he had a very close friendship with Swami Prabhupada, who used to write to him every month. And Swami Prabhupada asked him to accompany him back in the 60s, but he couldn't do it then. Anyway, he went on his own world tour, 1996 to 2010. And in those 14 years, he circled the world 30 times. And I was able to accompany him
Wow.
on some of those journeys. And he just radiated pure love everywhere he went. And thousands of people would turn out to see him. And, you know, he basically, yeah, unified the Hare Krishna movement to a high degree, and, you know, re-inspired people. Like I said, you know, when the captain leaves the ship, you know, the ship can kind of go off course, and he took the role of captain again and got the ship right back on course. It's his centennial year, 2021 next year. So I'm very happy to be starting to broadcast. And the only reason I'm talking about London's sacred geometry is to use it as a platform to establish, you can actually build faith on this stuff. When you start to investigate sacred geometry,
Right.
sooner or later what happens is you see the underlying design in the universe. You know, so when I'm talking about these patterns across the British landscape, you know, there's a 400 square mile, 20-mile wide earth energy mandala across London. It extends from Barnet in the north to Croydon in the south, East Ham in the east to Hamwell in the west. It's two circles in exactly the same proportions as Stonehenge, the
Oh,
two concentric circles of Stonehenge, except 1,080 times bigger. 1,080 is the radius of the moon in miles, and there are multi-layered, I think 17 or 18 multi-layered star patterns. And on the point of every star, and this is touching the points of both the inner and the outer circles, on the point of every star, there is a church, a well, a mound, or, you know, some places that nothing's apparent now, but basically there's enough evidence there, and the alignments crossing London, like Barnet to Croydon, there are 19 churches in a dead straight line. You actually start to see this is way beyond any human capability, because it's only been possible to even see this pattern with satellite mapping and you
right.
know, modern computers and
So,
or survey maps. And
question.
right in the center, let me just say, right in the center of this, and this is extremely relevant to broadcasting and what we're doing here, Nick. right in the center of this massive energy mandala is BBC Broadcasting House, and they know full well they're utilizing. That's why the English language and the BBC, they employ 23,000 people. It's why they're the most influential broadcasters in the world, because of this energy mandala. It's like uh, a a a place of power. Like, if you look at the Earth as a living body, this is like a chakra point, if you like. London is like a chakra point on the body of Mother Earth. Immensely powerful spot. And earlier I sent you the images. There's that uh, description of this is mapped out in the window at Alexander Palace. An exact map of the 30 sarsen stones and the 2 circles of Stonehenge is in the great window of Alexander Palace,
which is the BBC.
Where the BBC first did their first major broadcast in 1936, which I think also, did they cover the Olympic Games? I don't remember, but that was the year of the Olympic Games. But so that was the first major broadcast that went out into the universe. 1936. That was, I don't know if you remember that film, Contact. Do you remember that one?
I don't think I've seen it.
Okay, no, but it was about making contact with alien races, but it was about transmissions being received, powerful transmissions being received in other parts of the universe, starting with the 1936 Berlin Olympics. Anyway, I'm going off topic there, but well, it's not off topic actually, but so yeah, the once you actually start to see these patterns in nature, you actually see this is beyond any human capability.
So would secret societies have been able to set up the design of London this way, or is it just too long and old?
What you're talking about, if you look into the human body, you'll find that on a molecular level, these are like crystalline structures, like a water molecule, like a snowflake is a perfect hexagram. Every snowflake,
water memory sort of thing.
Yeah, every snowflake is a unique and perfect hexagram. But water molecules, the body's about 65% water, the brain's about 80% water. And water molecules can become distorted, and that's when we get sick. Sound can literally make a difference to the quality of it can look like a beautiful snowflake, the water molecules in your body, if you're bathed in pure sound. But if you're sick, for one reason or another, and the great Masaru Emoto, the Japanese scientist, photographed water molecules, but he proved that you could change the structure, the molecular structure, by if you just use words, or even just writing a word and sticking it on a jar would actually change. If the jar was full of positively charged water, and he wrote the word hate and stuck that on the jar, it would actually change the molecule. I mean, it's very extraordinary science, but
what if you said om to it?
Yeah, it would. Well, the om is deeply connected with the Sri Yantra. And yantras, this is a whole other subject as well, but basically yantras has many different meanings, mechanical devices, if you like. But there are a type of yantras which are geometric shapes that can cause a positive energy flow in your house. Like, for instance, I've got the classic yantra set around my house, because it helps if you've got a blocked energy flow from the north or the east. If you put one of these yantra geometric patterns on the wall, it helps the energy to flow.
So better. What exactly is it? Is it a poster? Is it, what form?
Yeah, I'm just looking around, seeing if I've got any.
Can you print it off and just?
Yeah, I can send something to you. I'm just looking around, see if I've got I usually have a yantra or two to hand, but so this is. I can show you this. That's quite exciting. Do you see that?
Yeah, that's an interesting symbol there. So it's a
Well,
circle within another
that is
circle
the
with
two
this
circles.
upper
That is the two
right
circles at
triangle.
Stonehenge in London. But it also reveals the basic geometry of the Great Pyramid. So when you draw a baseline
Ah,
across the inner circle, and you take the peak to the top of the outer circle, then the slope you get is the exact 51-degree, 51-minute slope of the Great Pyramid.
so the geometry of the Great Pyramid or the pyramids is fundamentally linked to the geometry of Stonehenge.
It's based on Earth-Moon proportions. So if you
Right.
take the inner circle as representing the diameter of the Earth, the outer circle represents the diameter of the Earth added to the diameter of the Moon. And this is where it gets interesting, because if you draw a square around the inner circle, the perimeter of that square equals the circumference of the outer circle. So this is a technique known as squaring the circle. And this is the basis for temple design. So the square represents the measurable material world, the finite world. The circle represents the infinite spiritual world, and where you can reconcile and harmonize the square and the circle with squared circle geometry, such as Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, the City of Revelation described in the Bible, where you can harmonize those two. You have a temple, a meeting place, and that creates a conducive atmosphere for connecting with the higher world.
Okay.
So chanting Hare Krishna is very powerful. If I chant quietly, that's powerful. 100 times more powerful is if I chant out loud, singing. But 100 times more powerful than that is if I get together with a group of people. So 10,000 times more powerful than quietly chanting Hare Krishna. Get together with a group of people chanting. Well, can you imagine how that potency increases?
A lot.
When you go to a place like Stonehenge and you've got hundreds of people chanting Hare Krishna, and that sound vibration is that sound vibration is entering those quartz-rich megaliths, the sarsen stones and the blue stones. That's entering into the earth. Stonehenge is deliberately situated above the largest aquifer in Britain, underground water in Wiltshire. When you connect with the earth and the water, you're connecting with all of the earth and all of the water.
So what's the significance of the water spiritually? Is it linked to the spiritual uh is it like the spirit body of earth? Is it linked to that?
Well, the basic elements in the Vedas. I mean, we have a table of elements. What is it, about 117 elements, isn't it, in
Yeah,
the classic? So
something like that.
so the elements in the Vedas. This sounds primitive, as described as the gross elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether.
Right.
Ether being the medium across which sound waves and light waves travel. So that goes beyond the air around the planet and the sky. That goes
Right.
right across the universe. Those are the five gross elements, and then three subtle elements: mind, intelligence, and ego. And now that sounds like, oh, that's very primitive. You've only got 8 elements there. But
Right.
actually, when you look at it in comparison to the Western table of elements, the Western table of elements only covers solids, liquids, and gases, basically earth, water, air.
So the table of
Uh,
elements is more zoomed in on certain elements of the
it,
traditional
it's a
elements.
break. It's basically the table of elements is a breakdown of three of the great 8 elements. So it looks more
Right.
impressive. But you know, there's nothing in the table of elements that describes fire or ether, which are both gross physical elements, and of course nothing whatsoever that because mind, intelligence, and ego can't be measured by any you know, can't be measured through your five senses. You know, we know they exist, but you know, how would you quantify? How would you demonstrate a molecule of mind? Or you know, they're not molecular
Yeah.
things, are they? This is subtle energy, but they exist. So this is the great science. The Vedas is the great science
Okay, so
of.
what did the Book of Revelations, what does it say about the city of Revelation?
It describes it. It describes. Let me get. Hang on. This book is out of print now. This is by John Michel. He's like the
Right.
grandfather of sacred geometry.
Okay.
He wrote New View over Atlantis back in the 60s. He's departed now, bless him, but he was, yeah, he describes the symbolism that's in the book of Revelation. You've got to remember that when the Bible was written, first written down, the Christians were being horribly persecuted by the Romans. So
Right.
in order for the Saint John, who wrote the book of Revelations, to convey his ideas, he had to convey it in pretty mysterious language. So, you know, he's talking about multiple headed dragons and numbers that don't entirely make sense. But the most famous numbers from the book of Revelation, everybody knows these numbers: 666, the famous number of the beast, and 144,000. Now, 666, there's no such thing as an intrinsically evil number.
Right.
666 represents the male energy, the emperor, the sun. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the size of the circle surrounding London, 1080 times the size of Stonehenge, 1080 being the radius of the moon in miles. When you add 666 and 1080 together, you get the number of fusion, which is 1746. So this number represents perfect balance and harmony.
Why does it represent that?
Because it's the perfect balance of lunar and solar, male and female energies.
Ah, okay.
So if you like, our brains, the left brain is like the masculine logic
Yeah.
processing side. The right brain is the feminine, intuitive, creative side.
Yeah.
If we're all left brain, we function like computers. We're just processing information logically,
Yeah.
and that's our education system.
There's not really much to life that way, is there?
Sir Ken Robinson, you know, he's probably one of the most famous YouTube lectures of all time. I don't know if you've heard it, on the subject of. I think it was entitled "Is Are Our Schools Killing Creativity?" It got like millions of hits.
I
But
recommend watching it.
he went through the academic system. Sir Ken Robinson, he's a great man, wonderful man. I think he helped broker peace in Northern Ireland. You know, he's a
Oh,
wonderful
really?
character.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no, he's an immense person. You know, he's a great soul. But he's talking about the absolute necessity for balancing our education system with creativity. He said basically the academics in universities, they're just like left brains on legs.
So maybe art should be much more of a encouraged subject than merely
Well,
something at the side of education.
physiologically, the left brain governs the functions of the right side of the body. So
Right.
the right brain, the creative, intuitive female side, governs the functions of the left side of the body, which is obviously where the heart is. So when you're out of touch,
Oh, of course, that makes sense.
so when oh good, that was a eureka moment. So when
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
out
the heart, the right side of the brain, yeah.
So when you're out of touch with your right brain creative, intuitive faculty, you lose touch with your feelings, your heart. So, we can, you hear proclamations. It starts to sound a bit like Spock off of Star Trek. That is not logical. It's just like, well, I'm sorry, but we're not logical beings. We're human beings endowed with this incredible human life is given to connect with God. When the right brain is starved, when creativity is starved, when we're not stimulated on the intuitive creative side, we lose connection with our heart.
So we must do art and stuff like that. Or
We
what?
must do art. Even, and singing, art, dancing, laughing, spontaneity.
Yeah.
That's all there. It's like a great festival of colours and sounds. And this is the place where people venture in with substances and stuff, and that's, I wouldn't advise it. I won't deny that. I've I'm not going there.
You've indulged in your own way.
Well, I can't hand on heart like President Clinton say that I didn't inhale, because
Right.
once or twice I did. But anyway, but to do it actually in the pure, clean way, this is the Hare Krishna way, is the best way to do it.
And you can only
Because,
get the same experience through a pure way.
well, you get a much better experience. I mean, Swami Prabhupada, you got to think, this aristocratic old man of 70 is coming into. He wasn't an uptown Swami in New York. He didn't come and just live in Manhattan with the rich people. He was down in the Bowery with the bums and the hippies when there was a revolution going on. Do you know what? He arrived in September 65. By, I think it was January 1967, he had organised, or his followers had organised, a concert starring the Grateful Dead, Janis Joplin, the Moby Grape and the Holding Company over in San Francisco. So he'd arrived in New York, and even within 18 months, less than that, he'd gone right across America, right into the heart of the youth. And he was dealing with hippies. He was dealing with, a heck of a lot of spaced out, drugged up, crazy people. Can you imagine an old man of 70 convincing people who are addicted to, sex and drugs and everything, to give it all up, shave their heads, and come and live a clean life? What kind of potency he had.
Well, maybe going into that sort of thing, actually, if you're living a more hedonistic lifestyle, it might actually lead you out of it just through the meaninglessness of it, right?
Well,
Because you can't continue to live that way and be happy.
No, so this is Western civilization. Is ultimately it's meaningless, because if you come through the education system and you're convinced that you're just a mutated monkey who's here just to earn money and buy things, then you've set yourself up for a completely meaningless life. But if by good fortune, you get sick of it, by God's grace, it's just, I was sick of it by the age of 25. I'd had enough. But I was also on my spiritual search, because my mother had died. That was the great impetus for me to look there. Otherwise, I'd have probably just, been Mr. 2.2 children working for an insurance company. But, and, luckily I was plucked out, and, all of my negative experiences, I look back now and think, oh, actually, I thought that was all really terrible. But I now see that the good Lord was just guiding me gently, because he doesn't force. His nature is that he may be supremely powerful, but he's also our dad. I have
And
children,
our mother.
and our father and our mother, yeah. And I have two children, and yeah, you want them to behave in a certain way. You want them to do things, but you can't force them. You encourage them to do the good things, and you discourage them, and if you're anything like me, you didn't listen to everything your parents told you. And if they tell you not to smoke, it's just like,
okay. You
why
stop
not? Why
smoking.
not? Yeah, if they're really insistent about it, you'll anyway, but we can either learn by hearing from wise elders, or we can learn by ignoring what wise elders have to say, and then we go out and suffer and just think, oh, I should have listened to them in the first place.
I mean, there's two. I mean, sometimes, but it's one way or the other. And if one isn't the way you're going, then you're going to have to.
So this is a great school, the Earth, human life on Earth. This is the greatest school in the universe, and it can also be described as a hospital or as a prison house.
Or an asylum.
We're being educated. We're being.
But the way I see it as more of a school, it's just a kind of
Yeah.
tough school. Like, like it's a game we play living here. There must be something for a soul to learn from a more limited experience, because they say that if you creativity, for example, is actually encouraged by more limitations, and like if you can grow from learning how to deal with having less, I suppose. I mean, I don't really. This is beyond us, I suppose. But
So where do you want to go? I mean, I can go back to London and its sacred geometry, but my fundamental purpose in focusing on the sacred geometry of London, because I'm a preacher for the Hare Krishna movement. I make no, I'm not ashamed of that. I don't actually believe in recruitment or conversion or particularly heavy duty proselytizing. What I really believe in more than anything is informed choice.
okay, so let's go down to summing up what your movement's about, and just then we can finalize.
Okay, yeah. So I the foundation of any spiritual path is faith.
Right.
When we have faith that God is real, or that a particular process is real, or it will take us closer to God, then we can progress on that path. So because a lot of people's faith has been practically and systematically destroyed through the education system, through Darwinism, or through the limitations of science, which doesn't even touch on subtle matter or God. Life, love, and God aren't really taught in our education system. Sacred geometry represents a subject matter which is tangible. You can see it. You can see it in the ground plan of London, and across the whole planet. It actually, this is a worldwide harmonic grid. But yeah, you've got a matrix of creation, if you like, reflected in London. You can build faith on that because you can see that this is way beyond any human capability. So once people have a foundation in faith, then as I develop my podcast, London Revelation, I'll be talking about, the city of revelation. And, the Bible has a happy ending. It says that we cross into a new state of consciousness. It says that the city of revelation, which is a symbolic, crossing into the age of Aquarius, a refreshed human race, a higher level of consciousness, that this city of revelation descends like a bride adorned for her husband. That's in Revelation 21. So the Bible has a happy ending, that the whole human race is uplifted. And the prediction within the Hare Krishna movement is that all of this might seem far-fetched to you, but that all of the religions will actually eventually just join together in the chanting of God's holy names. And I would be perfectly happy to chant, different names with, in Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, but I'd like chanting Hare Krishna, but we can all chant together. That's the main thing.
Unity.
Because unity. When people sit round a table and talk, they always argue. But when people sing, they harmonise. So that's what I'm aiming for.
That's a really special, valuable lesson there, I'd say.
I'll leave you a little verse I wrote from a poem I wrote called The Wizards of Om.
Okay.
By talking, men can never agree, but the simple secret of harmony, as every holy book proclaims, is loudly singing God's holy names. I'll leave you with that. Hare Krishna.
Right. Yeah, that's special, and I recommend you can check out his one of his websites, which is the wizard www.wizardsofom.com.
Yeah, thank you for that.
So I hope you enjoyed it, and I've certainly enjoyed it.
No, it's been a blast, Nick.
Yeah.
I'm you know, it's what have we done? Nearly crikey, about 2.5 hours here.
Yeah,
I mean,
this is the longest I've done so far.
well, I mean, perhaps you could just break it down, because I don't think anyone's going to listen to anything for 2.5 hours. But
I
you,
think you'd be surprised. People that listen to long podcasts.
all right. Well, thank you very much. I'm very, very honoured, and it was wonderful, and I look forward to we'll do it again sometime. And another time, I'll interview you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah.
And listeners, if you've listened to the whole thing through, well, thanks for listening. Yeah, so I look forward to talking to you another time, and I look forward to you listening to another time. So goodbye for
Okay.
now.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. Bye for now, and I'll speak to you soon. We'll carry on our conversation online, etc.
All right.